I'm Nick Whalen from RotoWire. I'm going to tell you about three of the most overvalued quarterbacks in 2024 fantasy drafts. Let's get right into it. CJ Stroud of the Houston Texans. So far more often than not, I find myself playing the weight on quarterback game in drafts. The higher you draft a player, the more risk you're incurring. And when it comes to the QB spot, I just usually don't like the risk reward equation at the top of the draft. So that applies to CJ Stroud. I love the player, obviously one of the future superstars at the position if he's not there already. But he's emerged as the QB5 in ADP this season, only 4 spots behind Lamar Jackson at the NFFC right now, going about a round ahead of Anthony Richardson. And look, I get it. Stroud was fantastic last season, over 4,100 yards, 23 touchdowns, only 5 picks. He even missed 2 games late in the season, still put up those numbers. But drafting CJ Stroud as the QB5, burning a late 4th or a 5th round pick on him, it means you're taking him at what I view as his absolute fantasy ceiling. You're getting a really good player, but you're paying a premium for it, and it's more of a luxury than it is value at that point in the draft. There's very little rushing potential when it comes to CJ Stroud. That's going to limit his true best case outcomes. He'll have a really tough time approaching the same ceiling as someone like Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson. He could certainly approach 5,000 yards passing. Maybe he gets to 30, 32 touchdowns. That's in the cards, but it feels like QB5, maybe QB4 with some injury help. That would probably be the ceiling for CJ Stroud this season. I don't mind drafting a player with his potential, who added even more weaponry this offseason, but really it's about opportunity cost. Which premium skill players are you passing on to take CJ Stroud that early? For me, I'd rather wait on quarterback, beef up my wide receiver room, maybe add an RB2, even target one of the top tight ends in that range. Ultimately, the projected drop-off in production from Stroud to guys like Jordan Love, Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy, even Jared Goff, it's not as massive as you might think. Jordan Love, for example, is going 2 rounds later. Dak is going 3 rounds later. Goff is widely available, 60, sometimes 70 picks after CJ Stroud. I get the upside of something like a 2022 Joe Burrow season, 4,500 yards, 35 TDs. But even that only made Joe Burrow the QB4 in 2022. Last season, the difference between the QB4 and the QB8 was less than 2 fantasy points per game. Stroud will certainly have his spike weeks, but last season, he finished as a top 12 fantasy quarterback in less than half of his starts. And I get it. The weapons around him are tantalizing, but the lack of a rushing floor, it's keeping me away from CJ Stroud at cost. If you're enjoying this video, please hit that like button. Please subscribe to the RotoWire YouTube channel. Really helps us out a ton. Back to the list. Number 2 on the list, Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers. I just don't see that significant of a gap between Purdy and the true tier of, wait on quarterback options who go several rounds later. After the group of truly elite quarterbacks at the top, it flatlines pretty quickly. If I go into a draft and I want to wait on quarterback, I really want to wait. Burning an 8th round pick on Brock Purdy may not seem like a huge investment, but that's a range where I still want to be adding depth at premium positions. There's still plenty of good receivers on the board. You can take some shots at running back. Tight end even dries up pretty quickly after that range. Bottom line, Purdy finished as the QB8 last season in per game production, which is great. You're getting him as the QB10 or the QB11 this season, but you have to consider that a lot of things broke right for both Purdy and the 49ers in the regular season. Andrew Erickson from Fantasy Pros, want to give him a shout out. He wrote a great piece on this after the 2023 season. He noted that Purdy led all quarterbacks in fantasy points above expectation. He threw significantly more touchdowns than expected, and he was still only the QB8 last season. The Niners were also significantly healthier than they've been at any point in the last 10 years. You got a best case scenario season in terms of production and health from Christian McCaffrey. You could argue the same for George Kittle and Deebo Samuel when it comes to health. But again, if I'm taking a non-running quarterback in standard leagues, I want to feel like I'm getting a bargain, not just getting somebody who's appropriate at cost. And because of that, I'm able to load up at other positions earlier in the draft. To me, there's just not enough of a gap between Purdy and guys like Jared Goff, Trevor Lawrence, Kirk Cousins, even Matthew Stafford, who's going 50 to 60 picks after Brock Purdy. My advice, add some more skill position talent, wait on quarterback. Later in the draft, you can grab 2 of those names I just mentioned, or even take a shot on Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson or Baker Mayfield and just play the matchups week to week. Third and final quarterback on our list, Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills. All right, I know, hear me out. This is not a knock on Josh Allen, the player. He was the QB1 last season and by a good margin, the only quarterback to average more than 22 fantasy points per game. Actually came in at 24.2 fantasy points per game, but it's all about where he's being drafted this season. Not only is Allen the QB1, but he's the QB1 by a good 8 to 12 spots, depending on what ADP you're looking at. In CBS leagues, that means you're burning a late 2nd round pick on him. I've seen him go in the early to mid second in multiple drafts that I've been in. Having Josh Allen is an advantage, no question. But if you're taking him or any quarterback really in the second round, you absolutely need that guy to have an elite season. If he's drafted as the QB1, he basically has to finish as the QB1 or you're taking a loss. And that's part of the inherent risk of being the first person in your draft to take a quarterback. Can Josh Allen do it? Can he be the quarterback one? Of course he can. He's been the QB1 in 3 of the last 4 seasons. If you told me I have to draft a quarterback in the second round, he'd be the guy. I would take Josh Allen. But it comes back to opportunity cost and how much better you think Allen can be compared to his peers. Last season, he was 2 to 3 points better per week than Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson. But if you look back at past years, that gap is typically quite a bit narrower. When Allen was the QB1 in 2021, he finished with only 21 more total fantasy points than the QB2, Justin Herbert, who was going almost 3 rounds later than Josh Allen that season. The same was true in 2020. Allen was the QB1, but Kyler Murray was less than 1 point per game behind him. If you're taking Allen a full round ahead of the next quarterback in some cases, you really want him to finish as far and away the QB1, which is possible, but in my opinion, not all that likely. For one, the Bills have essentially a completely new receiving core without Stephon Diggs and without Gabe Davis. They bring in a second-round rookie in Keon Coleman. He's typically the first Bills receiver off the board. Khalil Shakir doesn't go far behind. Both of these guys are interesting young players, but there's a lot of unknown there. And if you're trying to replace Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis with 2 guys who have a combined 49 career NFL catches, that's a situation that scares me a little bit. Now, obviously, Allen should be able to provide a ton of value on the ground. The Bills are going to need it. He did rush for 15 touchdowns last season, far and away a career high. It's possible that sustains, but Allen had 13 rushing touchdowns over the previous 2 seasons combined. So I would bet on at least some regression when it comes to the rushing touchdowns. Overall, I take no issue with Josh Allen as the consensus QB1. I just won't be burning a second-round pick on him this year with all the unknowns at receiver and the likelihood for either some regression on Josh Allen's part or some progression on the part of his peers. I don't think we see a 2 to 3 fantasy point per game gap between the QB1 and the QB2 this season. As I've already noted, I prefer to wait on quarterback. That's my preference, but I think there are just too many valuable running backs and receivers on the board that early in a draft, especially if we're talking end of the second round. I can find much better value at cost at the quarterback position later in drafts. All right, those are our 3 undervalued quarterbacks. Again, please like, subscribe to the RotoWire YouTube channel. Go take a peek behind RotoWire's paywall for free right now. Just go to rotowire.com/try. Put in your email, nothing else, no credit card, no obligation. Super simple. rotowire.com/try.